All right, all right. Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to episode 95 of BIM After Dark Live. My name is Jeff, also known as the Revit Kid. Welcome to the show, all you BIM geeks out there. This is a weekly live stream where we talk about Revit, BIM, and any associated technology. This week, we're going to jump right into it. I have an awesome guest that I'm sure you guys are excited to welcome to the show. His name is Jared. And I'll let him introduce more about himself as we come on. And we're going to be talking about quite a few things. We're going to be talking about BIM in practice, small scale architecture especially. So I know there's a lot of residential architects out there who follow this stream. If you haven't noticed, this season I've been kind of focused on that topic of choice. So we're going to go through sort of BIM in the profession. And then we're going to work our way into the topic of Archicad and Revit. And so with that, I don't think I want to fart around too much with teasing, and I'll just bring in Jared. Hey man, Jared Banks, what's going on, man?
I'm just thrilled to be here.
Welcome to the show. So this is going to be a good one. It's Jared and I have been blogging about BIM for a long time, probably starting around the same time, and we've always kind of been aware of each other. We've comment on each other's content here and there, and probably cross paths virtually plenty of times. And I thought it was just time that we jumped on a live stream here and talked. One of the things that Jared will talk about is that he is a practicing architect, with his tool of choice being Archicad. Obviously, my tool of choice being Revit, and so our content, as different as it is also very similar. And so this is awesome sort of dichotomy between it. But before I go down that rabbit hole, maybe Jared, let the BIM After Dark audience know who you are.
Okay. I think you and I are kind of like when I look at out there in the world and think of who's the me of other tools like Revit, like your work seems the most aligned with what I do. So my name is Jared Banks. I'm an architect. I'm based out of Seattle, Washington. Online, hopefully, if you have come across me, it's through my blog, Shoenome. So Shoenome Architects is my business. I've been blogging about Archicad and BIM since 2010, I think. So, but 12, 13 years at this point. I do residential work, primarily additions, remodels up here in Seattle. My goal is to have all my projects be within walking distance of my house. I don't like driving. I like walking. But in addition to being a regular architect who does residential work, I also have this other side of my business, which is writing about Archicad and BIM, teaching people about both those things, giving talks, giving lectures, kind of doing all the Revit Kid stuff for the Archicad world.
Awesome. So actually, I guess if we dig back a little further, one thing I didn't realize until we connected again was that I knew you were originally from the East Coast. I believe when you started blogging, you might have been in the Boston area, I think, right? Maybe or maybe.
I was in Minnesota, then I was in Boston.
Okay,
then
there
I
we
was
go.
in Minnesota, then I was in Boston, then I'm in Seattle.
But I believe you also lived in Connecticut, right?
Yeah. I grew up in Connecticut, so I think we grew up just like not too far from each other.
Yeah, that's really funny.
So I'm from just north of Hartford. Yeah, and I had no idea that.
Well, it's funny when you said you try to make all your projects walking distance. It's like that's never going to happen in this state, right?
Yeah.
It's just we are the definition of sprawl, and there's you need a car around here. So it's pretty funny that you've made it doable in Seattle.
Yeah, I mean in Seattle, I did the math. Like in my neighborhood, I live in Maple Leaf, is North Seattle. If I worked on like 2% of the projects every year for the rest of my career, I would never run out of houses, and I could just like start remodeling the houses I've already done after
there you go.
10, 20, 30 years.
Never ending circle, right? And I did want to remind everyone in the chat, if you're here live tonight, to feel free to ask some questions as we go along. I will cherry pick the ones that make sense in the conversation, so don't make it way too out in the left field. But feel free to ask. I know we've got some typical audience, which is awesome to always see some returners, and I'm assuming we're gonna have some new audience too. Maybe we got some Archicad users in the house, so I'm excited to see and meet you guys as well. So let's go back to your history then. So you landed here in Seattle.
Yeah.
How did you get to picking walking distance only small scale residential in Seattle? What took you to that point as an architect?
Following my wife.
Well, there you go. That works.
that took us a couple places. But I think maybe if I could shift that story a bit
Sure.
and just talk about like my journey to being on this podcast with how I
Sure.
became an Archicad expert, because I think that's an interesting topic
Okay.
for today's conversation. So when I got a little cheat sheet over here, so if I look over there, that's what's going on. Um, I first used AutoCAD in like 1980, I don't know, 7 or 8. So the first version of AutoCAD I used was AutoCAD 2.5 or 2.6. I had to go back and look it up. There was no mouse support. It was just like you were clicking. Now, at the time, I was like somewhere between 6 and 8.
Mm-hmm.
But my older brother had gotten a copy of AutoCAD. We installed it on our 386 XT, and like, yeah, I was like drawing tanks and spaceships with my brothers. So it's kind of weird that I'm not that old, but my history with architectural software goes back to like way, way back. So I played with AutoCAD for Livona as like a little kid. And then in the mid 90s, my older brother, who's themed here as a computer guy,
Mm-hmm.
brought home 3D Studio Release 4. So not 3D Studio Max, but like 3D Studio. That I had to look up was like 94.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like as now as a young teenager, I'm like messing around with this stuff.
Now you can do your tanks in 3D.
Yeah, actually, the only thing I could do with that software was like draw a profile, revolve it, and then I learned how to morph it from one thing to the other. This is like, just after Terminator 2. So that's all I was doing, is like make a shape, morph it into another thing.
Perfect.
Could never figure out what to do beyond that. But so I went to architecture school. I was in architecture school 1999 to 2005. We didn't touch computers. First year. Sophomore year, it was optional. I basically taught myself AutoCAD so I could get a job.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I wanted to get a summer job, so that's what everyone did. Is you learned AutoCAD.
Yep.
So I did AutoCAD at a couple of summer jobs. Then I worked for Gensler for 9 months as part of the internship. I went to Rice University, and you do 4 years of work, or 4 years of school, a year of work, and then another year of school. And so a lot of the stuff I talk about to this day of like template building and, smart use of CAD and BIM in a residential firm came from 9 months at Gensler and seeing a mega corporation with a team of CAD managers at the time. There's like 3 or 4 guys who were at the CAD department. So to see this big corporation, how they systematized their work and had standards really spoke to me. And
or how they struggled to systematize their work and have
standards.
God,
no, it was look,
they struggled too. Yes.
Yeah, this was 2003 to 2004. Yeah. They were using AutoCAD, but also getting into ADT, and like I remember trying to do a little bit of 3D wall work and some doors
smart
windows.
walls,
It was
the red target of death. Oh, I remember that.
Not pretty. So I did that for a while, and then I left. And for 5 or 6 months, I worked for a high-end residential firm in Houston using Vectorworks. So that was my first experience. ADT started to teach me a little bit about 3D elements, but doing Vectorworks for those couple months, it was all 2D, but we were doing instances, and like, you draw a window once, you'd save it as like a block, and you'd start using it again. And so it's just like pre-BIM stuff of how to work smarter. After school, I ended up working for a company for maybe 6 months that used AutoCAD. And so I took all this stuff I learned from Vectorworks and dumped it into AutoCAD to again be like, okay, I can just make a million blocks. And there was like nests upon nests upon nests. When I left, I like named all the blocks, all this crazy things, with the intent that whoever comes up to the job after me can like, get hints and read stuff. I think the firm went out of business, so no one ever came after me. But
did you take your blocks with you?
No, because that was the last time I used other than some moonlighting. It's the last time I used AutoCAD professionally. The next firm, this had been 2006, used Archicad. I never heard of the software before. They mentioned it in the interview. It was like, whatever, I've learned AutoCAD, I've learned Vectorworks, I'll figure it out. And this has been my mentality the whole time, is like, just give me software. I don't care what it is. I will just be it. I sometimes think about this as like, what would happen if Archicad disappeared tomorrow? Well, I would either careers because that's a good excuse to change careers, or I'd become an expert in another software like that. Those are the two options.
Right.
So I started learning Archicad because that was the software that was given to me. And at that firm, I quickly became the BIM manager. I started teaching other people how to use it. I used it for 2 years at that firm, and I wanted a new job. I thought I'd go somewhere else. I didn't care what software I had. I was like, well, I'll learn whatever. Coincidentally, ended up at another firm using Archicad, and now it's like integral to my career and personality.
At that point, those two firms, would they? And how many people were at those firms? Were they large, medium, small?
So the first firm was, I think, 6 to 12 people, somewhere in that, depending on how healthy the firm was over those 2 years.
Right. Yep.
But I'll put it as, at one point we were doing an elderly care facility that was like 4 buildings. It's maybe 300,000 square feet. We had 10 people working in the file at once. And so this is like 2006, 2007. So, and then the next firm, which was Sala Architects, we maxed out. When they hired me, I was employee 45.
Okay.
And
that's
then
that's a good size. That's for architecture only. That's a good size firm for sure.
Architecture only and custom residential.
Got it.
So all they did, or 99% was residential. So very huge. When I left in 2012, after the dark times of 2007 to 2012, the firm was down to 25 people. But at its height, it was around 45, and there was about half the firm was people in Archicad working day to day.
That's awesome. So I think thinking about, I mean, it seems, I have to imagine that a lot of folks around yours and my age, we're not that far apart, probably have a similar sort of professional journey, in the sense that we worked in some form of AutoCAD first, 2D drafting, and then moved into a BIM program. And so as far as and you, it's interesting because you kind of also went through different size firms as you were kind of doing it, but also saw sort of CAD in a big firm, and then saw sort of this Archicad in a small, then Archicad in a larger, so BIM in a small firm, BIM in a larger firm. Would you say that the attraction to BIM itself as a concept was what you saw in Archicad that was so enlightening and so, like, that you hooked onto, other than, I mean, obviously they sort of had the program and you just used it because they had it, but I have to imagine that you clearly took a liking to it and continued on. Was it seeing that holistic sort of, I guess what I'm thinking of is, like, my aha moment was, it wasn't even really BIM really, I guess it kind of was less about the sort of, it took me a little while to start to understand the benefits of holistic building, making the documents from this holistic building side of BIM, right? But it was more along the lines of, holy crap, I don't have to print out check sets to see if view references are accurate. Like, that alone to me was like mind blowing when I first started using Revit. So I'm sort of thinking, like, for you, was there a moment where you're like, holy crap, this BIM thing makes sense because of XYZ?
It was a really gradual process, right? So I mentioned that stuff I was doing in Vectorworks and the early stuff in AutoCAD is like, I was starting to see the value of automation in production. And then when I started using Archicad, this is 2006. Archicad's been around since the early 80s, but the way a lot of people were using it was still like quasi-CAD. So we're using elements, so like 3D walls and windows and doors. And the model was there, but... Right.
But you never flipped in 3D. You never took...
3D was like the thing you'd check, right? You weren't working in 3D. It was just like, it was also there. And so sections were still 2D, elevations were maybe 3D, but there's still a lot of 2D over it. And the model was more tangential, or kind of like the thing you'd maybe show for presentation, but that's really it. And so I saw the benefit of this at this firm to bring standards in. So I was like, okay, you guys are a mess with standards. Let me take this knowledge I have from Gensler and bring it here. And then also, it's like, we have this 3D model. Why aren't we, doing interior elevations off the model? Why aren't we doing sections off the model? So the first 2 years is really exploring how to bring more of the smarts of the model
Mm-hmm.
to documentation. I don't know when I first heard the word BIM, but it definitely wasn't 2006. I don't know if it was
Right.
2007. Like at some point,
Yeah.
someone's like, "You're doing BIM." Like,
Oh, cool.
okay,
Cool.
yeah, great, great. The I think where it took off for me is like it was a tool I used, right? Just like any of these other things, it's just a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I switched the second firm that used Archicad, they took a chance on me and they bought me the nicest computer in the office and they gave me an updated version of Archicad. So I jumped from version 9 to version 11, which for Archicad users, that's a pretty big deal. That was one of those like sea change moments.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so here I was, the newest person in the office, finally getting to work for a company I really wanted to work for, working on residential, which I really wanted to do again. This is like my dream job. And so I was out to prove myself and to take all of my cool ArchiCAD ideas that I've learned over 2 years and just like make the coolest model and just impress everyone. And then just kind of kept doing that. But the other piece to this is like I went to school. I didn't think I was going to be like, if someone says, "Oh, Jared Banks, architect, what do you know about him?" Most people are going to be like, "Oh, the Shuno, the ArchiCAD guy. He writes stuff about BIM." That was never my intent. I thought I would just go to a prestigious architecture school, learn how to be a designer, become one of those guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the recession, right? 2007, 2008, 2009 through 2012 just
Yeah.
totally derailed my career. And one of the ways I stayed employable was I was the best at production work and I was teaching everyone else how to do it. And so where in another reality, I would have put all that time towards design and learning how to interact with clients and all that stuff. I spent 4.5 years just becoming the best possible production grunt,
But you were marketable at the time, right?
Oh my God, so marketable. Which is interesting. When I went off on my own, so I started Shunom in 2010 as I was actually the reseller for Archicad in Minnesota for a couple of years. So I was selling Archicad and then I started blogging about it and all that. But when I went off on my own in 2012, I had really never had a client meeting. I had never really designed something professionally from scratch. So all of that stuff of like how to interact with clients, how to do design, I had to just figure it out on my own. But I knew how to produce, which means I was profitable from day one because
that's right. you can make a set of drawings.
Money.
So
that's right. That's right.
You figure all the other stuff out. You can make a set of drawings. So I think so to bring us a little closer to recent times now. As your work, you sort of going out on your own. And then, specifically sort of focusing on more small scale residential, small scale can be used, obviously in different terms, but basically, single family residential with some outlining stuff, the ideas of what you took with you throughout this journey, whether it's the standardization, the production, or just generally the philosophy of it. How have you seen that sort of impact how you've approached your business on your own when it specifically comes to designing and constructing, I guess, small scale residential?
So I'm gonna go back and say one more historical piece,
go ahead.
which will answer this. So the answer to this is when I was a junior in college, this is one of the first projects I did, like start to finish in the computer, right? And I decided as a challenge to myself, I was going to design everything in the computer. So I was using AutoCAD and start to finish, there was like no sketching, very, very little sketching. Everything I was going to like design in AutoCAD. It was one of the most rigid, stale projects of my entire architecture school career. It was a fine project. I got a good grade. There was cool ideas, but it was just like so just dull, right?
Boring.
No other way to say it, just dull and boring. But I really liked the idea of challenging myself and thinking about the design process. And this is like of everything about my career and history with Archicad and all this stuff, like being interested in the process of architectural production and design has been a common thread. So 2 years later, I was doing a semester in Paris, and I told my friend David, I'm like, let's not use computers. This is our last chance to never touch a computer. So we did a whole semester where we didn't touch a computer. So I just like drawing cartoons and doing everything by hand. That was a lot of fun. So when I finally got off on my own and there was no boss to tell me what to do or how to do anything, I really embraced the idea of integrating BIM and design into one thing. So my process today, having now done this for however 15, 16, 17 years, is hyper integrated. So if I'm designing in Archicad, so I have like no sketches. I think this actually right here is like the first sketch I've done in months by hand. So everything is done in Archicad, and it just means that by the time the design is done or fleshed out, or I've thought through it, the documentation is just done, right? And so at the same time, it means as I'm designing, I'm jumping up and down in scale. So I might be this project, laid out the plan and then realized it all hinged on the stair. So I got down to like, 1.5 inch details basically. It's just in the model, but like hyper detail of that stair, and that thing is like perfect and totally works. And then you leave that stair area and you go to another part of the model and it's like still placeholders. But that's just part of the design process. So that's, I think, in what I continue to push, and I look at, we can talk about more like the bigger aspects of BIM. To me, it's coming all from the standpoint of how can you use BIM to automate production and facilitate design and get to a point where all you're doing is designing. And then one day at some point in the project, you say, I'm done designing, and everything's done. Maybe you have to spend some days doing a little noting here and there, but it's just like trying to move it so I get to design. That's it.
No, I love that. I think that to me, as you're saying it, I'm agreeing with. I think that that is a difference between, let's say, well, for the sake of this conversation, we're going to say small scale BIM and large scale BIM, or big BIM and little BIM, right? So when I think of big BIM, right, because of the process of let's say, I don't know, a $30 million school or something like that, because of the process, the amount of information, the amount of people involved, it is very much linear in the sense that you're developing at some point in time, then is when you do documentation, right? It's very difficult to sort of create documentation. Yes, you're going to take advantage of the fact that you're using BIM in the sense that some of your documentation done, but to your point, and I see this myself when I'm doing the small scale work, it's easy to do the documentation while you're designing, and it doesn't hinder your design, and these tools are so powerful that it's not like you're reworking, and rework isn't that much. It's not that big of an effort, right? And so that is something that I've noticed. I mean, even I was mentioning this barn I'm working on right now. I've done 3 or 4 iterations of it, and I've had plans and dimensioned plans and elevations since basically day one, right? And so it's like you want to do permit drawings, all right, give me a couple hours, and they're basically done, right? and
exactly,
because of the fact that, and I don't consider myself restricted, right? I've modified this design 3 or 4 times, and I think that's a great differentiator. I don't know if it's because it's just one person. Is that easier, right? Because it's just you, or is it because of the scale? Is it because of the process, right? But I think that's a differentiator for sure.
I think definitely one person helps. I think also having the average person on the project being super experienced, tons of years doing this, right? Like the average person on my project has 17 years of using Archicad, right? Like that's a good team, right?
True,
it's just
true.
one person, but
and they're going to follow your standards.
Exactly, most of the time. But,
right.
But it's also that dimensioning is that once upon a time, my first job was by hand. I did my summer job. I learned how to letter, right? And you would draw a dimension because you were like done. It was time to put the dimension on and move on. Whereas with BIM, you put that dimension on there to help you design, to help verify things, right? That dimension is doing things for you, the designer, not just communication something at the end. So
it's almost a tool.
I find exactly. So today I was working on the second story remodel edition, and I was doing interior elevations of bathrooms.
Hmm.
But the reason why I was doing them is those interior elevations were helping me understand the design. And so I was using those interior elevations to build out the model and then verifying that the information was, in all the places I wanted.
Hmm. Awesome. No, that's great. I think that alone. I mean, when I think of the big BIM, little BIM, to me that's a huge turning point. The other one is just generally the concept of BIM on a smaller, large scale. Seeing it on the large scale, it has a lot more to do with the collaboration and sharing of information between like lots of parties, right? Whereas on the small scale, it's what you're talking about. It's utilizing this tool to not only be efficient but also share the information sort of with yourself almost, right? And then with the client, right?
Yeah, with your client yourself. And I think that's the thing is that the big BIM side of BIM gets a lot of credit for making an old process better, right? Because that's what, if you're clash detection, right? If everyone's putting their models together, it's what someone would have just had to do manually, and now there's a better way of doing that. So it's still in some ways what was.
Right.
Whereas the little BIM side of it, for small teams, you really have the opportunity to start innovating in how work is done and when work is done. So I think sometimes little BIM is poo-pooed because it's like, oh, it's not, you're not using Navisworks or you're not exporting IFC. So what are you really doing? It's like, oh, I don't know. All of this stuff just here, right? Like, so I model all my structure all the time, right? So I hear about this. We're talking. You mentioned this earlier about a project where someone didn't model the structure, so someone else had to. It's like, to be honest, I don't really care what my engineer does because by the time I give him drawings, I've already preliminarily modeled every joist and every beam and every truss because that's part of my design process, right? I don't put a void. I think about what that is and through a smart template, right, through good standards, it's no harder to design with this stuff than without. So,
most certainly, and yeah, I mean, and speaking, coordination doesn't always have to be mechanical, electrical, plumbing, right? Structure is a perfect example, especially in residential work, where something as simple as 2x10s and 2x12s, depending on how they're interacting with your fascia, with your windows, your doors, etc. I mean, there's coordination there, right? I mean, the barn I'm talking about, they're talking about doing heavy timber, and so the heavy timber guys are doing their timber drawings, right? Well, I modeled that in my model, right? And modeling, and sure enough, we had to modify a few of the braces and stuff because they would have been right in front of where a doorway was supposed to be, and that's coordination, right? And that's that's something that if you looked at their drawings and looked at mine, you might be like, okay, but then all of a sudden you put them together in 3D space, and you're like, holy crap, I can't walk through this door because there's a 8x8 in the way.
Yeah. So you asked about the aha moment of BIM. I'll tell you one of them. It was maybe 2009-ish. I was living in Minnesota, working for Sal Architects, working on a project in North Carolina. We'd never met the client in person. I'd never set foot in the site. I think my boss had been there once. Did this really nice house, got the structural engineering drawings. We're good. We're going to permit. And on a whim, I think I decided to model some of the structure. So we had this flat roof with not much space. And I modeled those beams, put them into the right space. And I looked at the model and they were poking out of the roof. And it was like,
oops.
Whoa. Right? So I was able to go back and tell the engineer, hey, we have to fix this. We have to make it work. If I hadn't done that, like, I don't know how we would have seen it. Right. I know you could still do this in the old ways, but it was just so fast and easy. Especially it was fast and easy for a young person. And this is total soapbox moment here. There's a classic thing where you'll hear like basically every architect on the planet be like, the only way to really learn how buildings go together is to like pick up a hammer and you build that house yourself. That is one way. Another way is to be really good at BIM. Right? One of the ways I taught myself how buildings go together is you build a model and you get to a point and you're like, I don't know how this stuff goes together. I need to ask people. Or you start to model it and you realize, wait a minute, this doesn't work the way I thought it was. And so a lot of how I understand the way buildings work is because I've built them virtually. I built so many buildings virtually over so long that that's taught me in the way, like, I don't spend money on tools, I spend money on bass guitars, right?
Right, there you go. No, this is actually, so somebody in the chat a little while ago, I think this is a great, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, because I hear it all the time and I have these conversations all the time, is when you're talking about sort of the young, let's say young architects coming up and joining firms, there's always this, I feel like there's a reluctancy. I mean, to some extent, I would say, 30 years old, less, that generation, from my generation down, basically, I think we can adapt these tools pretty quickly because of our upbringing with computers and 3D and all that good stuff. But there's a little bit of reluctancy because they don't want to become the BIM person at the firm, right? They see like you learn Revit, you learn Archicad, Vectorworks, BricsCAD, whatever it is, and then you don't want to get shoehorned into becoming that. So I'm interested to hear like what your perspective would be on if someone said, yeah, I don't, I shouldn't say they don't learn it, because they have to learn it for their job, but maybe they don't, even if they're passionate about it, they don't take that extra effort to really dive into this tool of their trade because they're afraid of getting shoehorned into this BIM persona within the firm. So I'm curious what your perspective is on that, having been through various versions of this.
I love this question. It's something I think about a lot because I definitely got shoehorned into that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I left my last job before going off on my own, I basically had conversations with my bosses, and they're like, "We don't know if you're a good designer." I'm like, "I spent the past 4.5 years like doing all this stuff. It wasn't traditional design, but like it was design thinking."
Right.
You have to embrace it. I think the hard truth is you have to risk being labeled the CAD, BIM, Revit, Archicad, Vectorworks, whatever guru, because that's the future, right? If you don't, and you're like, well, I'm just going to learn enough to get by, and once I'm a principal, then I don't have to touch this crappy programs anymore.
I can just sketch on Trace and someone else
I'll just sketch,
right?
Right?
Yeah.
That's the old way,
yep.
Right? And that's, maybe we'll talk about this in the second half, but one of the reasons why I'm very successful as a sole proprietor doing single family residential is my process is so efficient and so condensed and so integrated that, without the tools that I'm using, you just can't compete. So if you don't learn this stuff, you're just always going to be, not in control of your own destiny, for like to not, I would be hyperbolic. Like,
yeah,
this is the future. Like in 50 years, if people are like, I want to be an architect so I can draw all day, we should just be like shut down the industry, right?
Right.
What we need is people who can figure out how to navigate that. So do I have any like magic tips? No, because my process was really ugly to get to the point of freedom and like independence and using BIM for my own benefit. But you just have to get it to where it's invisible. Yep. I mean, that's the ramble, is like the way through that is not to avoid it, but to get it to where using Archicad, using Revit is just a thing you do.
It's the tool,
right?
And no one even knows or cares which tool it is, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think so. Before we take a quick break and we jump into Archicad and Revit and sort of talk about that lovely, I want to say debate. I think we're not going to debate it. I think we're going to stay positive. We're two positive people, but I do want to talk about it because I think it'll be a fun conversation. I did want to share one story that I don't think anyone knows related to this, which is when I was at the larger A&E firm back in 2014, 15. Maybe even less, 2013, I don't know. But, I was hitting that exact roadblock that everyone's talking about, in the sense that I just got my license. I love designing, right? And I still, to this day, I do love designing buildings. Like I like, the aesthetic of buildings, right? That whole process I love. But I was looking for a new job. And I, before I joined Turner, as on the construction management side, I went on quite a few interviews of local competitive firms. At that point in time, right, 2015, the Revit kid was been around for quite a while, so it's pretty known. Even with I didn't have to put it on my resume, it was pretty well known what I was doing. And I was specifically trying to get hired as a designer, and none of the firms that I was interviewing with wanted that, right? They were, no, we need the BIM guy, we need the BIM guy.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the reason why I ended up joining the construction management side was I said, well, fine, screw this. If you're not going to hire me as the designer, even though I know that I've got not only a decent design aesthetic, I think, I also have an extremely efficient process of documenting my design aesthetic, right? Including putting these things in place. It's like, well, fine, I'll go over to the construction side and use all that information. I'll be a BIM guy there, but I'll learn 1,000, new things on a completely other side of the industry. And I'll take all that together and then do my own thing, which is, this is sort of, so, I think to some extent, I back myself in a corner too. But if your end goal is, like you're saying, is doing your own stuff, then the knowledge that you have that you can gain, even if you end up being pigeonholed as a BIM person, you experience a lot of different things different ways. It's like you said, just the production process of you can learn things. I spent my high school years basically drafting red lines and then eventually modeling red lines of other design architects and engineers. And so I wasn't designing anything, but I learned so much about how buildings go together just by taking a detail and modeling it. So hopefully that's helpful for those kids out there who may be facing the same dilemmas. Hone your craft, okay? Right? If you're a master carpenter, why would you not want to learn how to use a hammer better than anyone else, right? I mean, come on, guys.
Well, it's that 10,000 hour rule, right? You just you embrace it and you'll get through the other side.
Yes. And I think what will happen is you'll actually find you'll probably have more options than if you didn't, right? And that's probably the key there, right? So we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back from the break, we are going to jump into Revit and Archicad and figuring out the similarities and differences between the two and helping people understand maybe where one lands, where the other lands. So with that, let's jump over to a quick break. So that was a quick word from our sponsor, RevitFamily.biz. For those of you who don't know what RevitFamily.biz is, it is a website where you can download large packages and bundles of Revit families specifically for residential. So we've got Brenton, who's actually going to be on this live stream next week, so definitely check that out. He created a great array of cabinet families, window family, door families, and he does have a new package of families coming out soon, which I'm not sure if he's going to announce next week, so I'll wait. But not only did he sponsor this episode, but he also is offering you guys 20% off any package or bundle. So head on over to RevitFamily.biz, use offer code RevitKid23, and save 20% off any package or bundle, which can actually be a pretty decent savings. So thanks, Brenton. And sorry for the Archicad folks joining us. He doesn't make any Archicad content, but I'm sure Jared's got plenty of resources for that. All right. So and the other thing, I guess, I kind of wanted to touch on it because it came up quite a bit in the chat before we jump into Archicad and Revit. And for some reason, it just, no matter what I do, I can't avoid a conversation where SketchUp isn't brought up. And so I'm curious, your perspective on where SketchUp lands in our array of tools as architects, and how should we approach it as something that people use?
This is
I'm not even sure how to ask the question, but for some reason there just seems to be, because it's 3D, I guess, there's always like Revit, Archicad, Vectorworks, BricsCAD, and then SketchUp somehow makes its way into the conversation. And I'm just not, I don't know. Have you used it? Did you ever use it in the past? Has it ever been something that you've dove into, or?
So actually, I went to college with one of the founders of it.
Oh, get out of here! Really?
Before
pre-Google, what was it? Mac? I forgot.
Pre-Google.
Yeah.
I talked with him years ago. He was telling me stories that he would be in studio and then have to step out of studio to take phone calls about SketchUp. So what's interesting is I'm a couple years older than you. So SketchUp wasn't a thing when I was in college. Mm-hmm. So it really didn't. Well, actually, he was giving out free CDs of it, but the first time I encountered SketchUp would have been 2007, 2008, when I was working at a firm that some people were using it. And I learned it enough to like take over a model from someone else,
Hmm.
or if I had a boss who's doing something like I could use it. But by then I was already so good at Archicad. There was like, why
Right.
would I do that when I can do this?
Hmm.
And so for a while, I was up to date on what SketchUp could offer because uh, when I was at Sal Architects, they were trying to consolidate, and so I had to like make a lot of arguments and comparisons between software platforms.
Hmm.
But since 2012, I've opened SketchUp to like import or export
Right.
objects,
Only when you
but
needed to.
otherwise, only when I need to. But otherwise, I
Yeah.
haven't thought about it.
Yeah.
But to be honest, sometimes I'll be like, "Oh, what's new in SketchUp?" But I don't even think about it. The answer I have though is one of the big benefits of SketchUp is it's really easy, right?
Yes.
Like
Yep.
it's just a super easy modeling platform.
Which is
But
by design, right? I mean
right, which is
that's
by
what it
design.
was. That's what it was created for, right? It was created to be an easy modeling software.
Right. And I don't know its capabilities today. I know it's getting more BIMified with
Hmm.
every release. But to
Hmm.
be honest, I don't know at the moment. Uh, I don't care for it. Right. You know,
Yeah, no, no.
actually this maybe gets into what we're going to talk about is like if you're I assume if you're good at Revit, I know if you're good at Archicad, you don't need it.
Right.
So for me, I don't know why I'd use it.
Hmm.
I know there's a lot of cool things you can do. There's some amazing plugins, like there's a lot of cool features to
Hmm.
it, but this gets into my Archicad philosophy of I do everything in Archicad
Hmm.
and all my writing, all my YouTube videos. I've got, Shunome YouTube channel where I do tutorial videos.
Hmm.
Uh, Everything I do is out of the box. I mean, I make my own template and I share that, but everything I do and everything I talk to people about, I want accessible to everyone.
Hmm.
And so because of that, I just do it all in this one program. And I just don't see a need for it. And so maybe when I hear people like, okay, so we start designing SketchUp, then we go to Archicad, or we start designing SketchUp, we go to Revit or whatever. Those stories frustrate me because like just double down on the tool you have,
Right.
right? Make Revit work as a design tool, make Archicad work as a design tool. If it can't, maybe dump that software and try something else. But like I know it can. So get pigeonholed as the Revit person or the Archicad person, and then one day reveal that you can do start to finish
Right.
in this program and you don't need all that other thing. So
Yep.
for people in school, they're like, oh, I'll just learn SketchUp a little bit for my studio projects. Waste your time. Like, just it's not a serious. Fine, there's probably someone that's going to get mad at me for saying this, but
It's okay.
it's not a serious tool, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about what we can do with the tools that we're gurus
Hmm.
in. You just don't need it. So.
Right, and it's okay to be polarizing. Don't worry about it. We can say that.
This is Archicad versus Revit. Let's
yeah,
trash SketchUp.
yeah. Well, and I only bring it up because it came up in the chat, and for some reason, it always seems to come up in the context of BIM. And in my opinion, it's great for what it is, which is what you said. It's a simple, easy to learn 3D modeling program. To me, that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
And it's not BIM. Yeah, like you said, BIMified. Sure, yeah, they're trying to put things like layout and
Yeah.
stuff in it. But if you've, and again, I haven't used it either a lot other than opening stuff. But if
Yeah.
you've ever, triple clicked into 13 components and then selected something behind it, and it's just not. Sorry, it's just not BIM. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
lay that out there because I think it's an important conversation. And what you said there too with school is a perfect example. To me, right, if you're padding a resume coming out of school, and right now if you have Revit, Archicad, Vectorworks, any of those instead of SketchUp on your resume, it's probably gonna look a lot more appealing to someone hiring you than just SketchUp
Yeah.
on your
Now
resume.
I'm a sole proprietor. I really like being that way. I every so often think about hiring people, but to be honest, I probably never will.
You
Other
think
than my
about
kids.
it though.
Well, I think about it. Actually, my oldest daughter's 14. She's she's an
Oh, there you
employee
go.
of mine too.
There you
But
go.
anyways, if I were looking at 5 resumes and I had to hire someone,
Hmm.
and no one had Archicad experience, but one was like, I'm a SketchUp master, one's I'm a Revit master, one's a Vectorworks master, whatever. I would order them and I'd put the I'm a SketchUp master at the bottom
Right.
because like, why'd you put so much time into becoming a master of that program?
Right.
Like,
Right. Yeah, no, perfect. No, I wanted to bring it up because I did notice it in
Yeah.
there, and I do think, in my humble opinion, SketchUp is not BIM, and it should stop being equated as BIM personally.
Yeah.
So that's why I just brought it up because I stay pretty even keel about a lot of things, but for some reason that one just grinds me. I don't know what it
Yeah.
is, but
No,
it's because it's just not. It's not.
You and
BIM.
me both. Now, the counter argument to that, which I'll also support, is like if you're watching this live stream and you're like, but I'm a SketchUp master. What do I do now? That's fine. Like if you here's my big philosophy for BIM and tools. Like uh it should support what you do and you should be able to make money off it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a sole proprietor, you work for a small firm and you were crushing it and like making good money doing SketchUp,
Yep.
don't ruin your business
You
model.
can also learn another program.
You can.
It does set the
You can.
foundations pretty well. I will rightly admit that my first studio coming out of school, 2006, whatever it was, it was AutoCAD plans and elevations and sections, and it was a SketchUp model. This was SketchUp 7 or something, so this was pre-Google, right? This was, what was it, Macromedia? I don't remember who owned it at the time, but and I transitioned out of it as well, so you can too. Or I moved up the chain. All right. Okay. So I'm trying to figure out what the best way is to sort of approach the topic of obviously we were being a little facetious with the thumbnail and the title of this. Clearly we're not going to duke it out and not going to punch you in the nose about Revit versus Archicad. But and I think we were both on board that BIM is better regardless, right? And I've always felt that way as well. And that's why I think when people equate like Rhino and SketchUp to BIM, it just sort of frustrates me because it's not the same thing in my opinion. Right. And so I've always felt that way as far as ArchiCAD and BricsCAD and Vectorworks and stuff. I just, again, like you said, why am I going to learn it when I have this tool and I'm so deep inside of it? And so I'm interested to hear, maybe there is someone out there who maybe they're on the fence, maybe they're the SketchUp user and they're like, oh, I want to I want to up my game here or something like that because of our conversation. I guess did you have any thoughts on how we could start this sort of whether it's comparison or because I guess you kind of answered it in the sense, but one of the first questions I was going to have is like, what made you decide Archicad? It sounds like you got to that firm and that's what they were using.
That's right. Yeah, that's what they were using. I used it for a while, then I continued to use it. Then at some point it became invisible, right? Like, so there's no need to try anything else because this is doing everything. Mm-hmm. And I know there's always a need to grow and blah, 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 but like there's still a lot of runway for me to continue growing down my architecture journey with this tool that I am now like synonymous with basically. And that's, when I look at tools, like what I want to know is, do you enjoy using it? Does it make you a better architect? Does it make you money? Right? If those are the things, nothing else really matters. And so in the past, definitely got into some heated arguments and wanted to make the case about why fundamentally Archicad is better, blah, 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 blah. I don't know. I don't care.
So maybe the way we frame it is because we're talking the small scale BIM, I have heard, over the years that Archicad is better suited for small scale residential BIM than Revit. And obviously I don't agree with that, but I'm curious to hear, like, since you've kind of done both large and small scale Archicad to some extent, would you say that there's some truth to that or
So I knew this question is coming because this is one of like biggest things. It's good for all scales, right? When I started doing Archicad, we were in 2006 10 people working in the same file at the same time. There was some friction there. It's a million times better today, but we were doing big projects then. Big projects are done today. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of the benefits of why Archicad is good for small scale stuff now. Like it's just easy to do, but I hope that all of that stuff is also doable in Revit. And so like there's probably not time in this video, but something that I would love to look into doing with you is finding a way to where just like we just show how we do stuff in both these programs, especially for small scale, not to be like, oh, mine's better, but just like this is how we handle doing a kitchen. Like I
Yeah.
really enjoyed watching the first. I've only had time to watch the first four episodes
Hmm.
of your the kitchen renovation
Hmm.
project you did.
Yep. Yep.
Like because I just done a video on how to do
Hmm.
as built, and so it's like, oh, this is I've never seen someone just talk through how you
The
do it
process.
and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
process, and it was interesting. And what one of the things that struck me is not just that you're doing a different tool, but
Hmm.
your process for approaching how to do as built is different than mine.
Hmm.
You were using point cloud. I do everything kind of old fashioned,
Hmm.
and so you couldn't just be like, oh, well, this is how you do Revit, this is how you do Archicad in this situation, because we also had different processes. But
Right.
what I really loved about your videos was that you had integrated your technology, your tools into the process, so it was seamless and it was there
Hmm.
benefiting it. And that's the same thing that my video on how to measure a house in Archicad is doing.
Hmm.
Um, so like the commonalities were great. Is I think
Yeah, yeah, and I think to go way back to the whole, you know, shoehorning yourself. I think I personally think that the reason it's so integrate, like the reason it feels like such a part of my process is because of how technically efficient I am in the program. There's
yeah,
I don't there's zero restriction in my process, so I can just, like you said, it becomes invisible, right? It's just
yeah,
another tool, and just like, anyone here can pick up a pencil and trace and probably draw a partie diagram or something, right?
yeah,
Without any thought about it. And when you get to the point where the tool of your choice, Archicad, Revit, SketchUp, I guess, becomes that, that thoughtless to you, I think that's
yeah.
that's where it's beneficial. So then, again, just trying to sort of figure out how we want to approach this. And I actually love that idea. Maybe we should figure out how to do that, sort of like a duet of like a
Yeah,
side by side or something. We'll figure something out. Maybe people have ideas on how that could pan out. But I think
yeah.
that would be awesome, because
And
I actually haven't, like you said, once I dove in, I didn't really look back. I will tell you that way back when I was learning Revit in 2000, whatever it was, 9, 8, we had Archicad, Revit, and Vectorworks in the office. We were a small
yeah,
firm of only 5 of us, and we mostly digitized other architects' work. And so it was all about production, right? And I don't remember exactly what made us use Revit over Archicad at the time, but I do remember we did one or two projects in both kind of at the same time.
yeah,
And I don't remember what it was. It might have been structural, or it might have been like a rendering. I don't remember. There was like some feature at the time
yeah.
that might have differentiated it, and that just kind of made us do it. And then from there, obviously, we sucked in. But
Right, right.
that brings me to sort of the other piece of when it comes to larger scale use. What I don't, and again, I'm asking you because I actually don't know. As
Yeah.
far as the other systems, architecture or structure, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, the integration of that into the Archicad workflow. What is that like for you, and just in general? I mean, I know maybe on small scale not as much because you can kind of do it all, but if you're working
Yeah.
with consultants that are using it, is there, what does that look like?
It's yeah. So everything for me being small, I just do it all, right? Like I was actually just
Right.
dealing with this the other day where like I modeled the plumbing that I needed
Hmm.
for a project so I could validate it.
Right.
On a larger scale things, ArchiCAD is diving more into the multidisciplinary system. So they have like a stronger structural component
Hmm.
now and MEP modeler. So you can do a lot of that stuff, but not many engineers use it right now.
Hmm.
So like to say, oh, that's how you do it. I'm using that voice a lot. Sorry about that. But like to say,
That's
I don't know
okay.
why tonight's the day I
It's the
decided to
night.
try
It's
that
the
out.
night.
I also try out a new laugh. I don't know. I just distracted myself. So you can do it all in ArchiCAD. There's a couple of structural firms that do it, some MEP firms that do it, but it's not that common. So mostly it's through IFC.
Hmm.
Uh, and there's some good plugins for Revit so you can
Hmm.
import and export Revit models.
Hmm.
And it's basically non-issue once you take a couple of steps. And what those couple of steps are is the same things I assume with any platform is that you can't just say, hey, engineer, send me your file and have it work. You have to like actually have an implementation plan and
Hmm.
talk about standards and do some tests. And so it's been years since I've personally done it, but
Hmm.
once you like make sure it works, then it just works.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's one of the things where I hear a lot. The one like anyways, with people like, oh, not enough people use Archicad, or my engineer uses this other software, blah, blah, I need to go use that. It's like, it's not a problem, right? It might take a little effort, only in that it takes a little effort to set up standards. It takes a little effort to have a template. It takes a little effort to have a contract and write a business and get clients and all that. But
Yeah.
then it's
I think,
it's just a thing.
yeah,
So
I think one thing I've learned coming over to the construction side of it, which is the big BIM side, because we're doing large work, is I was definitely, and to some extent I can understand why, when it comes to multidisciplinary design, if you're using Revit, having, consultants that are also using Revit is helpful for the sake of the documentation, especially, right? There's a lot of, you have a lot more flexibility with the visual side of controlling, that part when you're bringing in other disciplines, right? But once we hit construction, one of the things that I had to sort of deal with that I didn't before was the variety of software that the contractors were using, right? And I can't tell the steel contractor not to use STS steel because he's using that to fabricate his wide flanges, right? And so I'm like, hey, dude, you got to use Revit. And so now, and then the mechanical, electrical, plumbing contractors, some of them use Revit, some of them using CAD MEP, some of them using this ridiculous program called HydroSprink, which, if anyone out there uses that, I feel bad for you, but it does all the calcs and the fabrication for sprinkler piping, right? And so I quickly had to it was like, oh shit, there's people outside this Revit bubble, and but it's good to know that, like, even Archicad or Vectorworks, right? The idea is still the same, like, and IFC, that's what it's for. So I'm glad to hear that it's unfortunately, in my humble opinion, on the Autodesk side of it, the IFC integration is not nearly as good as it should be, but hopefully that changes over time. But it's good to hear. So like, if you were doing Archicad for architecture, but there's a structural engineer who's dead set on Revit, there's ways to integrate those two.
Yeah, basically it's a non-issue, and that's something I believe in very strongly is, like, I want everyone in our industry to be able to perform at their highest level, working in a way that's best for them, right? And so again, at one point I was like, everyone should abandon every other program and just go to Archicad. It's like, no, we just abandoned SketchUp, and then you work with whatever program you want beyond that, because I just want you to be as high functioning as you can, because once you're fully integrated and you're doing design and you're doing documentation, it's all like this one thing. Your buildings are going to be better, your documentation is going to be better. Hopefully you're making more money. Like, I like to talk about this a lot. Like, why do we do BIM? It's to have more time to do more projects, or to finish your work in a shorter amount of time. And so you either make the same amount of money in less time, or you do more, but you make more money, right? And so it's like, that's all what this is about.
And to be fair, the quality of your documentation will end up being better, just by the sense of the coordination aspect of it.
Yes.
I wanted to bring up go ahead.
I've been doing this so long with BIM that, like, I just genuinely forget some of these coordination issues. Like, sometimes someone will mention, like, they're still using AutoCAD, and they're like, we have to go make sure all the detail bubbles align, or we have to make sure that. You're like,
what?
We solved that. We solved that a long time ago.
Yep. I remember the first one of the first projects I used Revit for. There's two projects. One was a small cancer center, but the other one was we were doing a bunch of temporary classrooms, which were one of those overflow ones, which are basically trailers that ended up being there for like 15 years, temporary, right? But we were doing all the decks that go around it, because they had decks with handicap ramps. And I remember starting the project in CAD, and the first thing that blew my mind was railings. And having this railing go down a ramp, and not having to sit there and trim all of the spigots on an angle every single time. And then, of course, it moved like 30 times, right? The ramp. And so I had to go back and trim all the way up. And I was like, holy crap! I just did this, and like my elevation changed. I didn't trim a damn thing. You forget so easily how much you got there. There's a good comment or question that I think, when it comes to the sort of comparison of the two, Jesus Martinez, so thanks for joining, Jesus. Looks like he follows you on Facebook and Instagram, so he's a fan. He said he actually is flopping between Archicad and Revit He uses Archicad for residential and Revit for commercial, which is interesting. And he said his reasoning is because the flexibility of custom windows and doors in Archicad is more productive. And so I'm curious. I mean, I know you don't live in the Revit world,
Yeah.
but I have heard that before, that there's the aspects of the window, some of the window and door components is better to some extent than some of the family creation things that happen in Revit. So I'm curious, when it comes to that side of it, are you modifying mostly out of the box windows for all that? Do you have a library of stuff that you've created and customized over the year? Like what does that look like on the Archicad side for you?
This is a great question. And this is exactly one of the things that I don't know if it would be boring for everyone else, but I think it'd be really great for us to just jump on sometime and be
I know we would absolutely love it, but I think
like,
people would. If we can figure out what the best way to portray that is, and we can brainstorm.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
I do think that that's a really cool, because I would also be interested, because I haven't, I jumped in Revit, I never looked back, so I don't know the first thing about Archicad other than the logo, and I've seen a couple videos here and there, right?
Yeah. So I think one of the strengths of Revit is our families, right? Like the power of creating families. And the little bit that I know about that, when I talk in Archicad circles, like, oh, I wish we had something a little more like that. Instead, we have objects. And one of the strengths of Archicad are objects rather than families. And so it's interesting that these are both strengths, but also kind of like hindrances. And so the way Archicad works is out of the box, there is an object library. Right. So there is an awning window and a casement window and a swing door. And so basically all the 99+% of like the basic standard stuff you need is all in the library. And then you can change its size. You can change a lot of parameters in there to get it really close to what you want. And so it's always taking this object and refining it to be like a better and better placeholder.
So you're kind of always starting with an object that exists and modifying that one that's there, right? So so you're not necessarily building the object from scratch.
Correct. So we're taking a default, we're refining it, and then Archicad has favorites. So basically like saved states of an object. And so you refine the object to get what you want, you save it as a favorite, and then you start with that favorite to then place the window. And so the favorite is like the awning window, just the way you want. And then you place it and you change it from 3 foot to 3'6" or whatever. So you change, like, you can further refine it. And that's one of the things I post on my website is the Shunome Open template. And so it's a template for using Archicad. And like, if you just open Archicad out of the box and you're like, I'm going to get to work. It's kind of tough, because there's no standards, right? There's just like all the defaults. You're like, well, here's this window, but it's not exactly the window I want. So I need to like change this parameter and change this and change that. And so what the template is doing is taking that first pass of like, this window is a perfect stand-in or a really good stand-in for an Anderson window or a Marvin window or whatever. Like maybe the frame is a little off, but you're going to be able to build your house with this thing.
Right.
And the graphics are all set up. So all you have to now worry about is the design that comes from that. And then if you realize you're not using a Marvin or an Anderson, you're using some weird window that has very specific frame dimensions, well, then you change it. But that template is like already getting you to the point where graphics are beautiful and standards align with, American construction.
So can you bring in foreign objects or objects that people make, or you're bringing in settings to those objects mostly?
No, you're not bringing in settings. So if you're bringing in something from another library,
parameters, I guess, settings.
You're either bringing in other objects, like someone else has scripted or created an object, so you're bringing in a totally different window, or because Archicad isn't the like front runner in the industry from a standpoint of like number of users.
Right.
Archicad has gotten really good over the years of being able to import stuff into it. So you can go to Sketchup Warehouse and you can download anything you want, or pretty much anything you want, you throw it in there. We can bring in RFAs and RBT files now. So like I can go to, you know, Viking or Wolf or something like that, and they'll have the range I want for you guys, not for me. And then I just import it and bring it in. It turns into an object.
Right.
The only place this breaks down, not breaks down, is like if there's a Revit family for a window, I can bring that in, but it's an object. It's not a window, which so it means that that Revit window, unless I'm missing something, won't recognize itself as a window to be hosted in the wall. So that's like, it is what it is. But why that doesn't matter for an Archicad user is the standard objects, or if you go down the road of CAD Image or one of these other companies that provides like third-party windows and doors, they're so good for 99% of what you need that it's like a non-issue.
Yeah. And that's awesome. I mean, to be fair, you know, Revit users, we tend to focus so heavily on content and libraries and management of all these. We need every family that we need, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I've always been, you know, a believer in minimal, you know, which is kind of what you're saying is you start your template and you have everything you need to do that specific thing. So if it's residential, I know what I need. I need the specific 2x4 and 2x6 walls. I need the specific, you know, couple different types of sidings. I need, you know, I only need a few different types of windows to do like 99% of the specific work I'm doing. Obviously, if I'm doing schools, that's a different template, right? I mean, it's going to be a different template, right? But I think that's you know, we tend to focus so much on like, I need this robust family library of these objects that you can get overwhelmed very, very quickly in that side of it, right? But it's interesting that you said that you have the ability to pull in the RVTs or RFAs from like a Viking. The interesting thing about that is like a lot of manufacturer content does stink even for Revit. And even that, most of that's actually just 3D CAD imports into a Revit RFA that then you're bringing into Archicad. So we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but just to let you know that it's pretty shitty, a lot of it.
I don't know. So what's interesting is I'll bring that into Archicad and oftentimes explode it into a morph, which is like basically SketchUp within a tool. So it's now like a really dumb object. I clean it up, give it back some smarts, save it back into an object, then place in my file. And so it's all this degrees of like, how important is it for my client to see the perfect range? And sometimes it's really important. Sometimes there's budget. Sometimes there's time. Other times it's not. And it's like, well, here's the default cooktop in Archicad. We all know at some point you'll pick a real one. Right. That's fine.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's you know, and that's kind of what I was getting at, was like, you know, having that robust thing. To what extent do you need that exact model of refrigerator when you could just show the refrigerator that's the same size as the model that you're planning on speccing, or vice versa? And you could have even a piece of information that says, you know, Viking refrigerator, you know, so tag it that way and everything.
Exactly.
Doesn't need to actually look like it, but that's, you know, I think that's an easy one. And the other thing is, you know, like you said, the manufacturers, you know, I was kind of being a little, you know, hard on them there. I mean, they definitely, I will give manufacturers credit that, you know, they, over the years, they're providing more and more better content for Revit users, which is helpful. Unfortunately, you know, not as much for Archicad users, but obviously, you know, there's different ways that you can utilize those things.
And it's, again, with manufacturers content, or with any, the level of detail you need for a thing in a BIM program, the question is like, what's the most important thing? Is it the data, right? Is it the product code? Is it just the overall dimensions? Like, is it the visuals of it? And you just have to figure out for your project and for your clients, what's the actual critical information, and then make sure you have it, right? A downside of some of these hyper-specific manufacturer content is they're static, right? So if the client actually doesn't want that fridge, they want a different size one, well, how do you deal with that? And so I have friends that work on very, very high-end residential using Archicad, where they're spending like days modeling light fixtures, because these light fixtures are like artist handmade things that don't exist like anywhere. And so you could do it all, but it's all just a matter of like,
does it make sense?
Does it make sense? Is this help your client? is this helping you get your work done? Is this making you money? Is it bringing value? So
Got it. What one last thing I'm curious because somebody Junior Thompson is actually he always joins the chat. So hey Junior, he said Archicad's magic wand is one of my favorite tools by far. What is he talking about? What is a magic wand? I'm just curious now.
I love it. This is this is again one of these things that would probably be boring for most people. So we could just do it offline. Is like talking about the nomenclature of the different software to learn out. Watching your videos. And you kept on referencing like the sketch, or I think that's the term, is like, okay, I get what this is. We don't really have this because we just solved this.
When I'm in sketch mode, when I'm in magenta lines, that's a Revit thing all day long. Yeah.
The magic wand is a way to like you hold down spacebar, you get the magic wand, and you click, and it will fill in an area. So depending on what tool you have, you can magic wand in a slab or a roof, or you can imagine if you have like
so it's using the extents of the walls, the boundary, and then popping in. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Right. Or it's a slab and your magic wand and walls around it. So it's a magic wand. It does it creates elements.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah. I think for the sketch, for the Revit users, it'd be so much like drawing a floor, and then you can auto sketch it, and so it's looking for the boundaries, and it'll click in and do the thing, and vice versa. But I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think I was just want to make sure there's no crazy questions that we didn't answer. I think we got a lot of great questions, a lot of conversation. I think we could probably go on for another 2 days if we wanted to.
For sure.
But I appreciate you coming on. I definitely think that we need to coordinate and collaborate how we can do a side-by-side type of thing or something, because I do think it would be really cool. I would love to see it because I'm genuinely just curious on how the two work. Honestly, I'm not even interested in comparing what's better than the other. I think our conversation here shows everyone that it doesn't really matter as long as you understand why you're doing it, why you're using the specific one, and why it works for you.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work, that's the thing, is like using BIM should be fun and should get the job done. And so if it's not, I don't care which tool you're using, maybe try another one, right?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I think one of the issues why everyone wants to have this like Revit versus Archicad fight, or why it seems like contentious or whatever, is there's not enough people who have a common language to discuss the tools together. Like, you're an expert in Revit, I'm an expert in Archicad, but like we don't know enough to just be able to say, oh, that's how you do a wall. That's actually, here's how we do it, right? It's not one isn't better than the other. This is just like, this is how it's done. Now we can talk about this and probably learn more about our own program. So
yeah, and maybe even find some features that we want to request for either side
Absolutely,
based on what we see, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome, Jared, and I really appreciate you joining us. And any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, this has been fantastic. I could, like you said, I could keep going forever. So
awesome. And we're definitely gonna connect and collaborate on how we can do that, because according to the chat, it seems like everyone else wants us to do that too. So we will figure out how we can do some sort of cool side-by-side series or something like that. The other thing that somebody did mention, which I wanted to bring up just because in case they weren't reading the chat, is that, and I noticed this too, BIM objects, bimobject.com, whatever it is, that I have noticed a lot more Archicad content too on there, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's a library of, I think, is it Autodesk now? I think it might be Autodesk now, but either way, it's I think it is now. But either way, I have noticed that when you go to specific content, you are getting multiple versions, and you're not just getting Revit, but there are Archicad options. I've seen more and more of that, which is pretty cool to see. All right, well, Jared, thank you so much. And folks can find you. What's the best way to reach out and follow your content and follow you?
So shoenome.com is my blog. I've got a lot of stuff on Archicad and BIM in general, and just being an architect, because those are all the same thing to me. I've got a YouTube channel. It's all Archicad content. And then shoenome at whatever, Instagram. That's probably the best place to go to see my work.
Awesome.
And I'd put that as a big plug, because I'm sharing a lot of what BIM does, right? So it's all the output. It's all the like fun stuff that my clients see.
Yep. And there's nothing better than that. I love I love seeing, and like I have Dan Stein is going to be on this series again. He's been on a few times, and he works at Lake Flato now, or Lake Flato. I always screw it up. and that's one of my all-time favorite design firms, right? And seeing how they utilize BIM to do like, I literally have like 4 books with Post-its all over it of their work, for houses. Yeah. Like the fact that it's being done in Revit is like that. I love that. Like that's just, and so just knowing that it was done in BIM and not, some convoluted old school way is always makes me happy. So that's a great plug there. So check Jared out on Instagram, online. I'll put all the links below. Thank you guys for joining us again today. Got another guest next week, and look out for a collab between Jared and I, where we're going to do some sort of a side-by-side and have a lot of fun showing how Revit does it and how Archicad does it, but maybe doing the same thing. We'll see. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed this, and we'll see you next week.